to begin with, the Bill 67, as in your previous two podcasts, your own individual one and in the group, you do point out the very obvious thing that you're introducing into the entire educational system of a province. What is an ideology? There's no need to walk around these words. And it also, in my mind, shows a continuation of a perversion, a twisting away from its normal course, a perversion of what the idea of education is. It seems now that in every possible social justice or critical racist or transgender, whatever the cause is, the schools of North America, but now we're going to get to Ontario specifically, the schools of North America have decided to make themselves centers of social attitude formation. The purpose of education is to open the mind. It is to bring a mind into its capacity. It is to treat a mind to learn from itself. And it is always to be fundamentally the inculcation of the absolute necessary skills for a man or a woman, a boy or a girl to function in a society. Computation, literacy, history. One very general point I want to make at the very beginning of this chat is that the schools have forgotten what they are. And instead of building these competencies and establishing character over time through the disciplines of understood instruction, they rent themselves out to the cause of the moment. And worse than that, in the case of critical race theory in particular, and this new bill in Ontario, they put adhesion tape on themselves, and they make the exterior or ulterior possibilities of education, we shouldn't be racist, the absolute core of their function and being. Let me give you a parallel. When I was at CBC about 8 or 9 years ago, CBC, for the benefit of audience outside of Canada, is a television and radio communication service. It's a national broadcast service. And its main concern is first the news and then the idea of the nation. However, in CBC, and it was established in written policy, it was put out to all radio and all television programs that our number one objective is diversity. Now, if you're a broadcaster, your number one objective is broadcasting. And if you're a school, this is almost wholly, it's vocational for sure, your number one objective is to build the character and mind of the students within by disciplined instruction in understood courses and nothing to do with pre-planted, and in this particular case, divisive and pernicious ideologies. So why the Ontario government of Doug Ford, which is conservative, has latched on to an American-inspired ideological and hard left movement and made it a central dynamic of the entire educational network. I've watched your videos. This is insane. And when parents learn that their schools are no longer making their lives better through better reading and better teaching. By the way, whenever has a school board in Ontario put out one of those wonderful bulletins advising them, how much our students have tuned into poetry, how much our students are now really alive with the spirit of mathematics. No, it's all environment, it's racism, it's identity politics, it's sexual politics. They have every agenda, but the agenda that only a school should have. That's my overview.
Well, one of the things I would say about that is that the ideals of education that you just espoused, so the development of individual capacity for literacy and numeracy and an appreciation of history, are all predicated on the idea that the purpose of the school is to develop sovereign individual citizens. And exactly. What people need to understand about the ideology that underlies this bill is that none of that is accepted as valid within the confines of that ideology. So people are best conceptualized and only ethically conceptualized as members of groups and racial groups, particularly for this bill, but the other group identities are not lurking far behind and are equally valid. And the entire purpose of the education system is to teach people that group identity is paramount and that moral people do nothing but strive to reduce all perceived inequalities between all perceived groups. And so it's fundamentally anti-individualist. And so the people, and I don't believe this is an overstatement, the people who wrote that bill would regard your view of education as racist because it doesn't give racial categories epistemological, philosophical priority. And so we might take a look at some of the details of the bill because the details matter. And so, for example, we could say, if you're racist, so this is the part of the bill that deals with 1 subsection 1(1), racism means the use of socially constructed ideas of race. And so you have to accept that to begin with, that there's an attempt there to insist that the theories of social constructionism are going to be paramount. We can get to that later. To justify or support, whether consciously or unconsciously, subconsciously, the notion that one race is superior to another. Okay, so we could focus just on that, which is like 1/100th of the bill. So now, if I believe that you're subconsciously racist, then that constitutes, well, that's the question. What does that constitute? Something to be worked against. Now, you're racist if you're subconsciously racist. Now, the question is, well, what does it mean to be subconsciously racist? And then the next question is, well, who gets to decide if you're subconsciously racist and what does that mean? And so if you believe, for example, that Canada has strived mightily in its past, in its flawed manner, to promote a society where people have equality of opportunity somewhat independently of their group categories, if I believe that explicitly, or if that shapes my perceptions, does that now mean that I'm racist? And I would say, according to the dictates of this bill, it certainly does mean that.
Well, and there are so many contradictions involved in the pseudo, because it's not a philosophy. It's an ideology. It is, to use their own word, a construct for political and social advantage. And we have a whole lot of them, which I'll probably get into later. But let's go to a couple of those points that you made. I heard, and I have a good memory, I heard as long ago as 1985. It stuck in my mind for various reasons. It was a very, very popular CBC show. And the biggest host at the time, and probably the biggest host of a radio program ever, was Peter Zosky. And funny thing, that's almost 40 years ago, that he was being interviewed by some race expert at the time. And Peter Zosky, because he was always that kind of, contemplative, open, extremely liberal person, he asked the question, and this is why you reminded me of it. How can I know? He was accepting the theory, by the way. How can I know that I'm unconscious? Can I be unconsciously racist? Well, you're just throwing out everything. You throw out the moral decision. You throw out the determination not to look at other people and judge them on exterior or extrinsic characteristics. You empty the whole moral idea of a Martin Luther King and his famous phrase, content of the character, not color of their skin. You also, this is amazing, that an educational institution, a school board or a department of education, could allow this slippery concept of unconscious bias, which by definition is ineffable, is unreachable, is untestable. If you don't know you're unconsciously biased, how in the hell does someone else looking at you, forgetting your external characteristics and your external actions, determine, on the basis of my scaffolding of a philosophy, I know you are. And then you could turn the question around. I often wonder about these wonderful anti-bias trainings that teachers and poor people in corporations, in the CBC in particular, drag their employees off to anti-bias. I always want to know, if the person up in the front of the class of that kind, how do we know that she's not biased? If she's going to peddle this, it's tripe, Jordan, it really is. When do we get so childish that we accept these things?